Good morning. My name is Michael Fix, and I'm the president of the Migration Policy Institute. I would like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar that's going to take up a paper that we're releasing today entitled A Profile of Children with Unauthorized Immigrant Parents in the United States. The paper is by Randy Capps, it's by me, and it's by Zhizhong of the Migration Policy Institute. I want to start with a few housekeeping notes. I just want to remind everyone that the audio and PowerPoint from the webinar will be on our website later today at migrationpolicy.org/events. The report's available on our website as I speak. If you have any technical problems, would you mail events@migrationpolicy.org or call 202-266-1929. And if you have any problems hearing via the web, please dial in using the call information that you've been sent via email. We're going to have a question and answer at the end of the call. This will not be a voice Q&A, so please type any questions into the Q&A or chat box on the right side of your screen and send to the host or email to events@migrationpolicy.org. Our speakers today will be Randy Capps. Randy's a demographer. He's the Director of Research for U.S. programs here at the Migration Policy Institute. He's written widely on demography and on the demography of the foreign-born, and he's an expert on both U.S. immigration and U.S. immigrant integration policies. Our other speaker will be Yoshikawa. He's a professor of globalization and education at New York University's Steinhardt School. Among Hiro's many accomplishments, and one that I think is especially pertinent today is his research on families of the unauthorized that can be found in his widely cited Russell Sage Foundation book, Immigrants Raising Citizens, Undocumented Parents and Their Young Children. Now, and I'll be moderating the session, and I'm the president of MPI. The paper that we've written and that Randy will present employs some innovative demographic techniques to impute legal status to non-citizens in the American Community Survey. In it, we estimate the number and state and major county distribution of children under 18 in the United States with one or more parents who are unauthorized. We draw a socio-demographic portrait of that population, painting a picture of their age distribution, the kids and the family's English language proficiency, and their incomes. We compare the children in families with unauthorized parents to other immigrant children and to all children, and importantly, I think for our purposes, we compare for the first time the characteristics of children in these mixed status families who are born abroad and are themselves unauthorized with those who are born in the United States and are U.S. citizens. And again, we provide data at the national, state, and major county levels. And then we set these numbers and characteristics against the backdrop of the Deferred Action proposals that were announced by the President in November 2014, proposals that, as many of you know, have been challenged in the courts and are now being appealed to the Supreme Court. And the reach of those proposals to these families, as you're going to hear, is surprisingly wide. I think, though, that the policy significance of this work goes beyond deferred action to proposals to rescind birthright citizenship, as well as policies adopted by Texas and North Carolina to restrict giving birth certificates to children of the unauthorized born in the U.S. Now, numbers alone make this a critically important topic. The 5.1 million children who live with an unauthorized parent represent 30% of all children of immigrants in the United States and 7% of all U.S. children in the United States. And that importance is only reinforced by the growing body of knowledge among psychologists and sociologists regarding the education and developmental disadvantages of growing up in households with limited social membership. These disadvantages and obstacles to integration were a very important theme of a recent National Academy of Sciences panel on the integration of immigrants in America that Hiro and I were members of, and it is a topic to which Hiro and Randy have contributed so much. Finally, I'll just say that this work that we're presenting today can be seen within the context of research that MPI and our National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy has been doing on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, on the risk and protective factors that influence the development of children of immigrants, and over many years on mixed status families themselves. So with that, let me turn the computer over to Randy to begin his presentation.
Thanks, Michael, so much, and thanks, Hiro, for joining us today, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining this. I'd like to, of course, acknowledge my other co-author, Ji Zhang, as well as the collaborators who really helped develop the methodology and put together the data that's underlying this report and some of our other reports on the unauthorized population. And they are Colin Hammer and Jim Bachmeyer at Temple University, as well as Jennifer Van Hook at Penn State University. As Michael mentioned, we do use the American Community Survey data. However, the American Community Survey data do not identify unauthorized immigrants as such. So we use another Census Bureau national survey called the Survey of Income and Program Participation, or SIP, that does have a question for self-reported green card, having a green card, having another visa, and using those kind of answers, we are able to ascertain who's unauthorized. The innovation that Michael mentioned is called multiple imputation. It means using the characteristics of people that are deemed to be unauthorized in the SIP and assigning people in the American Community Survey with similar characteristics that unauthorized status. And then we define our study population described here in the report and in the webinar as children of unauthorized, those with at least one unauthorized parent residing in the same household with them in the U.S. So overall, as Michael mentioned, we estimate in the U.S. there are about 5.1 million children of unauthorized immigrants. They represent 30% of all children of immigrants and 7% of the total child population. I gave a version of this presentation to a group in California earlier because this population is much larger and more significant in California than any other state. Almost 1.5 million children of unauthorized immigrants there, representing a third of all children of immigrants and 17% of the total child population. They are also over a third of all children of immigrants and 13% of the total child population in Texas and about 10% of the total child population in Arizona. So you can see from this that there really is a differential impact of this population in terms of its size in different states. If we move to the county level, we see even greater concentrations in some large major metro areas. LA and Dallas, both those major urban counties have 22% of all children that have unauthorized parents. In Harris, which is Houston, Texas, and in Orange County, which is a suburb of LA, it's 19%. And you can see here on this the other of the top 10 counties with the most children of unauthorized immigrants. One of the things that we highlight in this report, this is true for all children in immigrant families, and it's also true for children with unauthorized parents, and it's something that the general public may not understand. The vast majority of children are U.S.-born citizens, 79%. Only 19% are unauthorized themselves. Additionally, our methodology allowed us to identify about 2% of this total that have parents who have a green card or other legal status. This is generally because, 2% of these children themselves have LPR or temporary legal status, and that's because one of their parents has that status. In other words, there are mixed families where you have an unauthorized immigrant parent and a legal immigrant parent. So moving on to look at the age distribution, children in unauthorized immigrant families are slightly younger than all children of immigrants and all U.S. children. 18% are ages 0 to 2 versus 16%, and 13% are ages 3 to 4. So this means that interventions in the early years, early education, which is one of the themes that we discuss in the report, and Hiro will discuss in his comments as well, is very important to protect these children. Also, when you start looking at the age distribution and you cross it by the legal status of the children themselves, there is a very clear pattern. By definition, all children age 0, all the children who are born in the United States. They are all citizens. So at age 0, 100% of children of the unauthorized are citizens, and it's almost 100% up to age 2. It's over 90% ages 3 to 4, about 80% ages 5 to 11, and then it drops down to just above half for the older children. And you can see from this chart then that the unauthorized share increases in the reverse of that pattern. Now I want to turn our attention to a couple of other risk factors for children in unauthorized immigrant families. These, of course, aren't the only ones, but the ones that we can most clearly measure with these data. This chart shows linguistic isolation. That means no one in the household over age 14 or older speaks English very well. That means the parents are limited English proficient, the older siblings and other adult members are also limited English proficient. Here you can see the unauthorized immigrant families are much more likely to be linguistically isolated. About half of children of unauthorized immigrants up to age 11 are linguistically isolated compared to just 30% of children of all immigrants. And of course, linguistic isolation, lack of English skills, is very rare in families with U.S.-born parents. But this share declines as the children age, and here the risk is more so that it's the children themselves, the U.S.-born children, as they get older, are likely to be the ones who actually are English proficient, and they're probably doing the interpreting and translating for their parents in a lot of cases. Now I want to move on to the English proficiency of the children themselves. Here we see different patterns for the U.S. citizen children. Those are the children born in the U.S. than for the non-citizen children. And actually the citizenship of the children matters more than the legal status of the parents when it comes to the children's English proficiency. That's an important point to make, because at all ages, whether regardless they have unauthorized or other immigrant parents, the non-citizen children are much more likely to be limited English proficient. That's especially true at the older ages. And in fact, among the non-citizen children, there's very little difference in their English proficiency regardless of the status of their parents. What's worth mentioning, though, in this is that those older children, ages 12 to 14, 15 to 17, the reason why a significant number of them are English proficient is because a significant number of them come to the U.S. at older ages. Some of these children have just come when they are 15 or 16. Others have come when they're 10 or 11. So they haven't had the same number of years in schooling and in American society to learn English as the U.S. citizen children have, shown on the left side of this chart. Another indicator we look at is low income, and here we really see a very striking pattern that's very different for children of unauthorized immigrants than other children of immigrants, and for a variety of reasons that we could get into in the Q&A. This is the share that have incomes below the cutoff for school lunches, which we consider the most important indicator of low income in the child population. It's also the level of eligibility for a lot of major federal benefit programs. It's 185% of the poverty level. So this isn't just the poverty level, it's considerably higher than that. 3/4 of children of unauthorized immigrants have incomes below this threshold, and that's pretty consistent regardless of their age. It goes down a little bit to 71% ages 15 and older. It's about half for children of all immigrants, and again, with a slight decline at older ages. It's only 40% for all U.S. children, and there we see more of a decline as the children get older. And I think the difference with unauthorized immigrant families, and to a lesser degree with all immigrant families, is they just don't show the same progress. As the children are getting older, that means the parents are getting older. They've been in the labor force longer. But children, the unauthorized parents are not seeing their earnings increase the same way that all U.S. parents are. They're not seeing the household incomes improve. So in addition to having a higher poverty rate, children and unauthorized immigrants have more persistent poverty across the entire childhood from the young ages to the adolescent ages than other children. And then finally, we look at preschool enrollment because, and here we're just focusing on children ages 3 to 4. As I mentioned earlier, that the children of unauthorized are more likely to be in this age range than other children. as we know, with some of the risk factors that they have, and Hiro will describe some of these others, but certainly poverty and linguistic isolation are risk factors for their performance in school. Going to a high-quality preschool program like a Head Start or a pre-kindergarten program could help them prepare and do better in school. And yet, only 37% of children of the unauthorized ages 3 to 4 attend preschool versus 48% of all U.S. children. So this lack of participation in formal preschool is potentially another obstacle to these children's development. The final note that I want to end on is talking about the deferred action programs, because as Michael mentioned, the context for this is it's in litigation in the federal courts. Of course, it's being litigated in public opinion. It's very uncertain as to what's going to happen with these protections. Right now, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, the 2012 program that provides temporary relief from deportation and work permits for unauthorized immigrant youth, is in effect. You can see here what the eligibility rules for that program are. About 700,000 young people ages 15 to 30 are currently enrolled in that program. But the expansions to that program that were announced in November 2014 and the much larger Deferred Action for Parents, the DAPA program, are the ones that have been suspended by the federal courts. They lost, the administration lost in the appeals court. We're thinking it will go to the Supreme Court. We'll know this month whether or not it does. We may or may not get an outcome this spring. But in the meantime, DAPA and the expansions to DACA remain in suspension. So DACA, the current program that's in effect, does provide some protection to parents that were in the group that we're talking about, and it provides some protection to some of these children. Overall, it's not a very large number, though. Overall, about 4% of children of the unauthorized have parents who are eligible for DACA under the current rules, and another 4% are eligible for DACA themselves. That's the yellow bar. You can see ages 15 to 17, a significant share of the children 15 to 17, 33% or a third, are eligible for DACA. The minimum age for DACA is 15, so none of the younger children qualify themselves. But you can see that especially at the younger ages, a significant number do have parents who qualify. But the real protection would come and may come if and when DAPA is implemented. By our estimates, about 83 to 86%, depending on the age of children, have a parent who would qualify for DAPA. And so this is, I think, a real important bottom line for our report, just how widespread this protection would be. It doesn't just protect, I mean, the program is designed with the children who are U.S. citizens and LPRs in mind, but it also can provide some protection to older children who are unauthorized living in the same families. The primary group that's not included in here, the other 15% or so, are children who have parents who arrived in the last 5 years, because DAPA has that same 5-year eligibility rule that the current DACA program has. So in conclusion, about 5 million children have unauthorized parents. Almost 30% of them, 1.5 million, live in California. Almost 10% of them, about 500,000, live in Los Angeles. So it is a highly concentrated population. 4 million are U.S. citizens, and another million are unauthorized. About 200,000 of those in that 15 to 17 age range are eligible for DACA. And that's out of about 1.2 million total eligible for DACA under the current rules. In addition to unauthorized status, as we've shown, high linguistic isolation and low incomes present additional risk factors for these children. And so with that, I will turn it over to Hiro for the comment discussion. But Michael's going to say something first. Sorry.
Well, I just want to remind, thank you, Randy, that was a terrific presentation. I just want to remind people to submit their questions through the Q&A box on the left, or to email events@migrationpolicy.org. So with that, let me turn the floor over to Hiro Yoshikawa, Courtney Sale-Ross Professor of Globalization and Education at New York University. Hiro?
Thanks so much, Michael and Randy and Jay, for inviting me to this webinar. This is an extremely important report, and I'm honored to provide some comments on it. And I will be providing comments in part on this question of what does this mean for child and youth well-being? This large, very important number of children in the United States who are children with living with at least one unauthorized parent. So first of all, I don't have this in my slides, but the demographic methods here are innovative. They are important. They have been used and published in very good journal outlets. So they have gone over the past several years through quite a bit of peer review among the social sciences and in demography in particular. So I think we can have confidence in these numbers. So why is this report important? If implemented, of course, this is the key policy takeaway. DAPA, Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, could benefit millions of children of unauthorized parents and really capture the vast majority of that population. Now, why would these parents benefit? I'm going to make the argument that two of the major pathways are that they would provide greater access to employment, and I would add not just employment, but I think based on the current available evidence, employment with better work conditions and wages. A very key important point is that the DAPA would provide greater access to resource and learning opportunities for the children of the unauthorized, and particularly in this area of preschool education, where this report has the first, I think, national estimates of the rate of preschool education access among children of the unauthorized. So very, very important numbers. And certainly both greater access to better work conditions, higher wages, which also would result likely in higher incomes and address some of the poverty issues, as well as the resources and learning opportunities, would help address issues of limited English proficiency, which the report also highlights. So what do we know about the effects of having at least one unauthorized parent on child and youth outcomes themselves and their well-being? There is a growing body of research on this, and it was summarized in the National Academy of Sciences report that Michael mentioned, edited by Mary Waters and Marissa Pinot. That is at the National Academy of Sciences website. I refer folks to that report for a very good overview of these issues. Why this harm to child and youth development? I think the current evidence suggests four major pathways. First, and perhaps foremost, the higher stress that is related to unauthorized status certainly varies by state and local policy context. Much of that may be related to fears of removal or deportation or detention, and the other vulnerabilities that are associated with this status. Another key one is worse work conditions, with studies consistently finding substantially lower wages, lower rates of access to workplace benefits, and, for example, rates of illegally low wages below the minimum local wage of a third or more in different studies examining low-wage unauthorized workers and comparing them to low-wage authorized workers, often controlling for other characteristics. There's the threat of parent-child separation that I think goes along with and compounds the stress. And then finally, lower enrollment of citizen children and youth in the programs that they're eligible for. So there is, in essence, a greater reluctance that these parents report about submitting, for example, things like proof of earnings and employment because of their status. That means they are less likely to go through the paperwork of enrolling their citizen children in the U.S. safety net programs, as well as early childhood learning programs, preschool and child care subsidies, for example, that could have make a difference for their early development. So what are these studies? Kalina Brabeck at the Rhode Island College has released a new study showing that in middle childhood, lower academic achievement is associated with growing up with an unauthorized parent relative to an authorized one. Another large-scale study looking at more behavior problems finds higher withdrawn and acting out behaviors. By adolescents, Sarah Potocnik and Krista Pereira have found evidence of higher anxiety and depressive symptoms reported by youth who have one unauthorized parent relative to no unauthorized parents among Latino immigrant origin adolescents. And one large-scale study of Mexican origin young adults by Frank Bean, Susan Brown, and Jim Bachmeyer found a large effect, large barriers to achieved schooling, 1.25 to 1.5 fewer years of schooling, adjusting for a variety of other demographic factors among Mexican origin young adults who had at least one unauthorized parent. Then, of course, in terms of detention or removal proceedings or deportation proceedings, 2 studies have looked at the experiences of families that have had those kinds of direct experiences. Work by A.J. Chaudhry, Heather Kobal, and Randy was involved in both of these studies with evidence of heightened child behavior problems, higher school absence, and mental health issues among kids affected by those kinds of direct experiences of parent-child separation, either within the United States or then across borders. So I wanted to highlight one aspect of the preschool, the lower access to preschool, which is that we do know that there are economic benefits, of course, of high-quality preschool, of that high-quality, large-scale public pre-K programs, for example, are showing that they show returns to society that solidly outweigh the costs, even if you are only looking at earnings outcomes in adulthood, as one study did in Tulsa recently. And what might not be as well known is that in the early childhood literature, the benefits of preschool education look like they are larger for immigrant origin children, and that comes from studies such as the National Head Start Impact Study on the effect of Head Start, and 2 of these quality public pre-K programs at scale in Boston and Tulsa. All 3 of those studies find significantly larger effects among dual language learner children, as well as among Latino children relative to non-Latino children, suggesting that children of unauthorized parents would benefit quite substantially from preschool education. And in fact, the new study by Kalina Brabeck also suggests that children of unauthorized parents do and can benefit from preschool education. And so I think we need to think of this lower rates of access to preschool for children of the unauthorized in the context of the fact that they might benefit very substantially from increasing that access. So to conclude, I think the report really updates our numbers nationally on the magnitude of this problem and the consequences for the next generation and for the integration of the next generation into our society's economy and future. And so with this number, 5.1 million children with at least one unauthorized parent, of whom roughly 1 million are unauthorized themselves and experience additional barriers and blocks to their educational progress. This is nearly 1 in 3 children of immigrants in the United States, and 7% of all children in the United States. So with that, I think I'll conclude, and we'll transfer to the Q&A session.
Well, that's right on the moment. That's exactly at 11:30 when we hoped we would be at this point. So let me thank you, Hiro, for a terrific presentation, and I would like to open the floor for Q&A, and I'd invite people to use the Q&A function on the screen or to email events@migrationpolicy.org. And so let's just start with a couple of clarifying questions. Randy, we have a question. Children with unauthorized parents, does that mean all parents are unauthorized or just one?
It means just one parent is unauthorized. We do have the significant share that, a small share, but a significant share, where the other parent could be a green card holder or could be a U.S. citizen.
And roughly what share is that?
I'm not sure exactly what that share is, but it's less than 10%, about 10 to 15%.
About 10 to 15%, okay. Do we have more detailed information on New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut?
We have detailed estimates for the 5, I believe it's the 5, or at least the 4 largest of the 5 counties that are in New York City. We have a state estimate for most of the states, of course, including New York and Connecticut. I'm not sure if we have any county level estimates for Connecticut. We might have one. Which one do we have, G? Fairfield County, I think, which is probably the most populous in the state and borders on New York. So we have about 100 counties overall that we provide estimates for. And a lot of those are in California and Texas, but we have a sprinkling of counties across, I think, something like close to 20 states, right? 27 states, yeah. But we don't get into some of the more detailed indicators here that we did in the analysis, like the poverty and the socioeconomic status, the language proficiency. We didn't do that at the state and county level, but we have school enrollment, and we have at various ages, and we have the share of the children who are U.S. citizens in again, about 40 states and about 100 counties across 27 states.
Okay, great. Another question has come in. Do you see and have you thought about geographic variation in outcomes among children in unauthorized households? The example here that's given is variation in preschool enrollment rates across states or metropolitan areas.
Right, and again, we didn't analyze preschool across states and metropolitan areas, and it's partially an issue with the amount of the sample at that age range. But certainly there will be variations, especially because some states have universal pre-K programs, such as was mentioned by Hiro, the program in Oklahoma, and other states don't. And we know there's a lot of variations in preschool access. Probably the same kinds of factors that would affect that variation in access for all children, for Latino children, would also affect this population. But I know, Hiro, you might be a little more familiar with some of these variations at the state level than I am.
Yes, Hiro. How about this variation by metro area or by state level, and the interplay of, if you will, restrictive immigrant legislation, perhaps, on enrollment rates at the preschool level?
Yeah, I was just going to add that very point, which is that the provision of public pre-K varies these days also quite a bit at the city level. And then we also do have to think about the variation in immigration enforcement and a variety of other kinds of city, local, and state level policies.
Great. Specific question, Hiro, you might even want to weigh in on this, but let me toss it first to Randy. Do we have any statistics regarding stress conditions for children in New York City? Now, Hiro, I know you've written a book on New York City, so you might want to say what is known about that. But Randy, how about, do you want to why don't you start, and then Hiro, maybe you could pile on.
Yeah, we don't have any specific statistics on stress among the children in New York City. And again, Hiro's done some research on this. I think just to lead into what Hiro might say, New York is certainly a tough environment as far as employment conditions are concerned and daily life. On the other hand, it is a place where there haven't been the same kinds of major immigration sweeps as there have been in the Southwest and the Southeast. there's been a lot more of that kind of activity. The threat of deportation has been much higher in cities like Houston and Dallas and along the border and in LA than in New York. So those are different variables that might affect the family and child stress. But I'll let Hiro say more.
Yeah, I think in those studies it's important to distinguish the different kinds of stress, economic stress in general from the stress associated with specifically one with unauthorized status. And I would say there's no single measure that's been used across studies. So Kalina Brabeck has developed measures of legal vulnerability, so whether anyone in your family or network has experienced detention, for example, or a variety of different aspects of experiences that might affect the unauthorized. One recent study by a undergraduate here at Steinhardt, Ahmed Alif, actually looked at worries about deportation among New York State college students and did find fairly high levels. But in my own study, we didn't actually have a measure directly about this kind of stress. So I think we need to do more around the measurement of the different forms of stress that are related more generally to factors like economic hardship, but then looking at the aspects of stress specifically associated with unauthorized status. There's no doubt that whenever measures of stress are used, kind of no matter what the type, it does generally seem that it's accentuated among mixed status families, parents with this status compared to those who are authorized.
Randy, thank you, Hiro. Randy, maybe you could go back over this question. What's the difference between DACA and DAPA?
Sure. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's focused on young youth and young adults ages 15 to 30 who came to the U.S. as children, so that means before age 16, and who've been in the U.S. for at least 5 years and who have basically a clean criminal record. DAPA, Deferred Action for Parents of Americans and Lawful Permanent Residents, is focused on unauthorized immigrants of any age, so it doesn't have the age restriction like DACA does, who are parents of either U.S. citizen children or lawful permanent resident children. Like DACA, they have to have been in the U.S. for at least 5 years continuously.
Great. And here's a related question, which is, do they need to have attended school here in the United States to benefit from either DACA or DAPA?
So in order to benefit from DAPA, the parent program, the larger program, they do not have to have attended school in the U.S. Now, there's an education requirement to the DACA program, but it's got different components to it. So if they have at least a high school education, one assumes that has to have been in the U.S. because they have to have been here in the U.S. as children. So that means that they will have had to have graduated from high school in the U.S. or else still be enrolled in school, and that will also be in the U.S. So there is a U.S. educational component to DACA. Now, it is possible for people to qualify for DACA even if they didn't complete high school in the U.S. and they're not currently enrolled, if they enroll in an adult education program that will lead to the equivalent of a high school degree. And it's possible that there could be some that came as maybe middle-aged children, say in the 10 to 15 age range, who never attended school in the U.S., who then came and then went back to an adult education program. It's possible for some of them to qualify, but those numbers are going to be very small relative to the total.
Here's a couple questions here about unaccompanied minors and Central Americans in coming to the U.S. One question says, we're working in partnership with unauthorized Central American mothers in Virginia. We saw over 1,000 unaccompanied minors arriving last year, and I'm wondering if you have insights about how these reunifying families may affect young children in these homes. And here's another related question. So, you know, there's a report of an increase in deportations of Central American immigrants. What will the implications for children be, given that many of these immigrants are young mothers with children? Maybe, Hiro, you could take a swing at that, what the implications of deportations would be and the divisions within those Central American families.
So, unfortunately, I don't think there are virtually no studies of the effects of the different patterns of migration and then forms of family separation that unaccompanied minors face. The more general literature in immigration looking at family-child separations finds that it is there are really quite high rates of this, but I would be probably cautious about generalizing from those kinds of separations to the ones that the unaccompanied minors are experiencing, where they are clearly some of those separation issues might be compounded by the experience of traveling alone across country borders with the level of danger that these children face, as well as the pre-existing forms of exposure to community violence that these children and youth face in Central America.
Great. Randy, did you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, on both points. A couple of points first on the unaccompanied children that are reunified with their families here, and about half of them, I think, are reunified with parents, and then another, I don't remember, but significant percentage are reunified with another family member. The first thing is that there is a screening and vetting process for this family reunification, but it is not always that thorough, especially when it's done rapidly and the numbers are large. So there is some risk, and there have been some documented cases of unaccompanied children being placed in unsafe settings, such as people posing as family members that are really traffickers, or being reunified with family members who may be abusive, and there may be family stability issues. More broadly, of course, there may be economic and schooling issues for unaccompanied children. Sometimes there's difficulty getting the documents together to get these children enrolled. A lot of them, most of them are older, over 15 and older. Sometimes the school districts don't want to take them because they're going to bring down the district or school test scores. There have been some barriers erected by some districts, maybe even, I think, some litigation over getting some of these kids enrolled. So there's the issue just of the difficulty. Then once they do get enrolled, a lot of these children have interrupted formal education. Have a lot less content in the instruction than they would have had here in the U.S. So there's a number of educational issues. And then, of course, there's the additional issue of adding another child to a household. Most of these households are households with either unauthorized parents in them. In the case of all of Central America, in the case of El Salvador and Honduras, the parents may have temporary protected status. In some cases, they may have citizen or lawful permanent resident parents, but a lot of these families are economically disadvantaged already before an additional child would join them. As far as the family deportation, and by this I assume that the person asking the question was referring to this recent very small group of about 100 families that were rounded up in some raids recently. I think the issue there is less one of family separation. I mean, most of the research that I've done and others have done that Hiro alluded to is about families and long-term residents here, where a parent, usually a father, is deported, and then the kids stay behind with the mother, or in worst case scenario, the kids stay behind and the mom is deported and they stay behind with somebody else. And that's usually what families choose to do because they don't want to return the children to difficult conditions in Mexico, and the conditions are even worse in the Northern Triangle countries that, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, that these families are coming from. But these family deportations are deportations of children. We have to be clear about that. The family unit is defined. It's usually a mom and at least one child. So it does mean deporting the children as well as the parent. And that's a different scenario. A lot less research has been done into what happens with the reintegration of children at various ages. The unaccompanied children are sometimes deported too, though those numbers have been relatively small. But you know, they're being reintegrated into societies that are both violent and have very high poverty rates and a lot of instability at the moment. And I don't think we really know. I don't think we've really traced the impact on children and their parents being deported together back into these circumstances.
Excellent. Hiro, can I toss a question to you? We were part of the National Academy panel, and we heard a fair amount about this while we were in the course of our deliberations. Is there any information about how DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival students, are faring mentally, financially, et cetera, in comparison to their non-DACA counterparts? Do you want to just say a few words about what we've learned over the last 2 years on that?
Sure. Much has come from 3 large-scale studies by Roberto Gonzalez, by Robert Teranishi, the Suarez Orozcos, by Wong and Valdivia, around this issue. And so the most commonly reported kind of consistent findings are that DACA enrollees are reporting higher rates than non-enrollees of getting a new job, getting a driver's license, progressing in their education. And so those forms of progress that the policy was intended to affect, it looks like those kinds of transitions are being reported at high rates. The enrollees are continuing to report high levels of anxiety and worry about remaining unauthorized members of their households. So it is not entirely rosy picture on that front. But on these major milestones of work and transportation, but the other forms of integration that a driver's license and that form of identification bring, and progress in education, there are these consistent findings across those 3 studies.
Excellent, excellent. A provocative question here. What are our thoughts about the challenges of getting middle schools proactively engaged in encouraging DACA-eligible kids and their parents involved in applying at that point? And here I just want to make just a note about the way that we approach the data in the current study, on which focuses mostly on the DAPA program. The DAPA program is interesting in that it's the only legalization program that focuses on parents, or a legalization-like program that focuses on parents. And one of the ways that we subdivided the child population was by age, and the idea was to think about what the institutional impacts would be on early childhood education, on elementary education, on middle schools, and on high schools, if the program were to have to be implemented and have to be implemented quickly. And the bottom line here is there's a lot of kids in middle school whose parents would be eligible for this program. But Randy, do you have any further thoughts on that?
Well, is this about DAPA or about DACA?
This says DACA.
Arrival. So I mean, it's true. If DAPA were implemented, the parent program were implemented, you need broad-based across all levels of schools. And I do believe that some major urban school districts would take the lead on it. That said, with the current DACA program, the Childhood Arrivals program, I visited some high schools, not middle schools, in Chicago that were very proactive about this, and they had a counselor set up, or a counselor-like position. I think in one case it was sort of a career-oriented position, and they encouraged students who, you know, as it were, sort of come out as being unauthorized. I mean, there's a whole issue around, and this comes out in the literature by Roberto Gonzalez and others that Hiro mentioned. There's a stigma, of course, associated, and sometimes the children don't even know they're unauthorized because their parents haven't told them. So the first thing is the school has to be a safe space for that to happen. and that means there have to be people who can talk through what are the implications of this. The parents have to be convinced to talk to their children about it. That's going to be harder at younger ages. It's going to be, once you get up to ages 15 to 16, it's almost inevitable you have to talk about it because it revolves around identification, driving, applying for schools, applying for first jobs. So ages 15 to 17, which is where the program formally starts, at the high school years, it's a little easier to talk about it. The younger ages, though, it is important, I think, to get the children and families prepared to apply, because every year there's a certain number of maybe 50 to 100,000 kids aging in who will qualify when they reach their 15th birthday, and some of them will be in middle schools. But and then, of course, there has to be application assistance. People have to talk through, you know, any other issues around eligibility and help people apply. Again, I think Chicago Public Schools offer a model for this in some of the high schools. I'm sure that there are other, I know the Los Angeles Unified School District has done work around this in a number of schools as well. I'm sure the schools in New York City, in the Washington, D.C. area. Right. In Washington, D.C. and the suburban counties as well has probably done this. But other than Chicago, I have not visited any specific programs that would be you know, that I would represent as models for that.
Did we find anything? Did we look into unauthorized parents' likelihood to be enrolled in programs like Medicaid or CHIP or SNAP public benefits within the compass of this study?
No, we didn't look at enrollment. Now, conceptually, the enrollment in these different programs is different, right? So, individuals qualify or don't qualify for Medicaid, and the parents themselves wouldn't be eligible for Medicaid under current rules. Now, if a parent's eligible for DACA, childhood arrivals, it's possible they could, in the states of New York and California, be eligible for a Medicaid-like program, but not in any of the other states that I know of. The kids could separately be eligible for Medicaid and CHIP if they're lawful permanent residents or citizens. Food stamps is a household level benefit, and it's based on income and family size, and the family size basically only counts the lawfully present, with the legal permanent resident citizen members, although that varies a little from state to state too. So a family with 2 U.S. citizen children and 2 unauthorized parents would qualify for food stamp benefits, but not exactly, but about half the benefit level of a family where all 4 members were legally present with a similar income.
Hiro, you might want to start thinking about this question. It's a similar question. It's do we have any statistics, we don't, I think, on the health conditions, for example, infant mortality or healthcare access? Randy just talked about that of these children. But in terms of the health conditions, did you probe that with some of your work looking at the unauthorized children and children of the unauthorized?
Yeah, in that study there were no clear patterns. Just returning to the last one, this is again a study that I mentioned a couple times in my slides by Kalina Breivik, and she did look at rates of Medicaid for the child versus the adult. And for the U.S. citizen children, there were, as expected, much higher rates of enrollment in what is essentially SCHIP, State Child Health Insurance Program, or Medicaid child cases, whereas for the adults, I think that's where the big difference showed up as far which we would expect between unauthorized parents and authorized parents in her particular sample. We don't have a lot of data yet on the overall health of kids of unauthorized versus authorized parents. We do have a couple studies showing controlling, again, for a variety of household demographic factors, higher food insecurity reported in families of, it's non-citizen, so it's a little bit more general as a category. So work by Ariel Khalil. I think Jennifer Van Hook has another study on that topic. So a couple of studies looking at food insecurity. There's not that much out there on health, child health.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. We don't have the answer to it, but we can give a little information around it. Is there any information about families moving out of states that signed on to the litigation? And I would just mention on that point that the 10 states in the United States that have the highest ratio of children of undocumented to all children of immigrants, who you would think would be supportive of a deferred action for parents, all signed on to the litigation. So, and most of those states are, in effect, new growth states that saw a large, rapid growth in their unauthorized population over the course of the last 15 to 20 years. But I don't think we know much about out-migration from them, do we, Randy?
No, I mean, there have been a couple of relevant research projects that have tried to tease this out for individual states and localities based on immigration enforcement and restrictive immigration laws. So one looked at Prince William County, Virginia, after they implemented some new policies with the local police in Prince William County partnering with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to identify and deport people. And people looked to see whether there was some out-migration. We looked at some of those statistics ourselves at some point, and they were inconclusive. It's possible that there was a little bit of out-migration, but you know, there are other factors. This occurred these policies were implemented around the same time as the housing bust in 2008 and 2009, which relatively impacted that county, Prince William County, Virginia, relatively hard. Also, there was the Legal Arizona Workers Act that was implemented around the same time. It was passed and enacted and implemented around the same time in the state of Arizona that presumably required all employers to use electronic verification of eligibility to work. And there were also heightened immigration enforcement activities in Arizona at that time. And there was a documented exodus of unauthorized immigrants from Arizona starting around that time. But Arizona was also heavily impacted by the housing bust, almost more so than any other state, and took a long time to recover. So I think based on these two examples, which are sort of extreme cases, not just of signing on to a lawsuit or generally not agreeing with a potentially expansive policy to provide protection, but actually implementing some policies that led to some deportations or could lead to deportations. And the evidence was inconclusive. You know, in general, when people have looked at migration trends and what prompts them, they found the economy to be the biggest driver. Where job markets are stronger, that's where the unauthorized in particular go, because they're sensitive to labor markets, particularly for the less skilled jobs. And those areas have been in the Southeast and the Southwest. Again, aside from sometimes during and after that 2007 and 9 recession, for the most part, a lot of the job and population growth has been in some of the same high growth states that Michael mentioned that have had some of the most restrictive political statements and policies. Great.
So we've come to the end. Let me give a final question, which I think is a perfect wrap-up question. Thank you for this presentation. It gives a comprehensive overview as to how children are impacted by unauthorized parents. Now, we'll all have to put our thinking caps on. However, will MPI present in the future on recommendations or what kind of policies could be put in place? I would just say that this has been a subject of our work, not just recently, but over the course of the history of the organization, to think about what a program that would be effective and that would be successful and that would build on the lessons of earlier legalization programs would be under the rubric once of comprehensive immigration reform. This is an area of work that we will continue to pursue in general. And in specific, I think we will just have to see what happens with this litigation and think hard about you have to think if the DAPA program is upheld, it will have to be implemented quickly, and we will be deeply involved in thinking about what the vicissitudes of a rapid implementation would require, and how we could reach the most people in the most equitable and cost-effective way.
Yeah, and I would just add, if the program DAPA is not upheld by the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court doesn't refuse it and it remains blocked and suspended, then people will have to go back to the drawing board and think about what the policies are that could be protective. I do have to say, just as an outside observer, based on this small number of deportations that just occurred of the Central American families we talked about earlier in this conversation, that the Obama administration has significantly ramped down deportations from the interior with new, narrower enforcement priorities, and the numbers of parents being deported now today are much smaller than they were a few years ago. So if that trend continues or stabilizes at a low level, that certainly is protective, and I don't think we have to make that recommendation. It's something the administration is doing. It's subject to change, of course, if there's a new administration. And then on the other hand, if DAPA were to be implemented, it's not just to explore the implementation and how it works, but also it probably will open up opportunities for legislation to build on it, to build something more permanent, and then there will be a whole different kind of conversation around that. I don't know if Hiro had any last thoughts.
Yes, I was going to ask you, Hiro, if you have any final thoughts, please feel free to share.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say right now we are in the absence of DAPA, obviously, and so there are initiatives to try to integrate the unauthorized, with California being a striking example of a set of policies that are more, I would say, inclusive. And then I think a variety of the recent reports out of MPI and other places around this population of children of the unauthorized talk about the possible solutions. And I think this report again highlights access to learning programs and the idea of preschool education, but also there's been quite a bit written on what schools can do around this population, but also low-income immigrant families generally.
Terrific. So to me, I think this report just underscores what I think is often overlooked, which is that there is a strong developmental logic to immigration reform. I would also call everybody's attention to the fact that we'll be coming out reasonably soon with a report on the children of refugees that will be even more extensive. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Hiro and to thank Randy and to thank the audience for the terrific questions. If there are any questions which we haven't gotten to, and there are many questions we didn't get to because we couldn't get to them in the time allotted. I'd also like to point you to the related resources on our website and mention that slides and audio from today's webinar will be available at www.migrationpolicy.org/events, and the report discussed today is now up on our website. And finally, I'd like to note that for any reporters on the call who may have further questions, you can call Michelle Middlestat at 202-266-1910, and thank you very much.